Welcome the anointed ones. You can't bury someone who was planted, the roots will shame your shovel. And oh, how they tried. They plotted, they whispered, they threw stones with shaky hands and called it righteousness. They mistook your silence for surrender, your scars for weakness, and your delays for defeat. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, not for you, for them. Because everything they prayed would take you out is now devouring them from the inside out. That betrayal they hoped would break your spirit, it's breaking their peace. That loss they mocked you for, they're now living their own personal collapse, quietly, painfully, and with no audience to clap for their suffering. Fact, psychologists say envy is the only emotion that feels worse after it's fulfilled, because deep down, people don't want what you have, they just want you not to have it. And the funny thing, you never even asked to be the chosen one. You were just trying to heal, trying to grow, trying to breathe. But your presence alone made their insecurities itch. They started writing your eulogy while you were building your resurrection now. Tables have turned so hard they're getting whiplash. Their gossip is aging like spoiled milk. Their bitterness is starting to taste like the very dust they wanted you to choke on. They didn't realize that when you play dirty against someone protected, you don't curse them, you curse your own legacy. So buckle up. Because this isn't a pity party, it's a poetic reversal. And to the ones watching from the shadows asking, how did this happen to me? Let's just say, you invited it. You just didn't think karma kept receipts. Number one, they mocked your struggle. Now they're drowning in the same storm. They laughed when you were going through it. Not because they didn't see the pain. They saw it clearly. They just enjoyed it. You struggling gave them a twisted sense of peace, like your suffering made their lives feel more secure. While you were trying to survive your storm, they were watching like it was entertainment. They mistook your chaos for failure, your silence for weakness, and your breakdowns for proof that you'd never rise again. But here's the thing. Storms don't come to destroy everything. Sometimes they clear out what was fake, fragile, and no longer needed. While they were busy mocking your situation, they missed the bigger truth. You weren't being punished, you were being prepared. Every setback was refining you. Every moment you felt like quitting was shaping you into someone they wouldn't recognize when the dust settled. You didn't fold, you transformed. You became sharp, focused, and dangerous in a way that doesn't make noise but shifts energy when you walk into a room. Now the same storm they laughed at, they're stuck in it. And unlike you, they don't know how to survive it. Because they never had to. They never built endurance in silence. They never faced the mirror when it wasn't flattering. They never held on when everything screamed, let go. You did. That's why your peace is different now. That's why you're not bitter. You're just done. It's not karma in a cartoonish way, it's just life being surgical. What they put into the world, they're now holding in their hands, and it's heavy. The storm hit you first, but it hit them last, and hardest, because they never thought they'd have to walk through what they wished on someone else. They mocked your struggle. Now they're drowning in their own storm, and nobody's laughing. Number two, they tried to curse what they couldn't comprehend. They didn't understand you, so they tried to destroy you. That's what people do with things they can't define. They label it a threat. You moved differently, thought deeper, felt more, and carried weight they didn't have the capacity to hold. And instead of admitting they couldn't figure you out, they projected their fear as hate. They couldn't box you in, so they tried to cut you down. What they couldn't control, they tried to curse. But here's the irony. You were never a threat to them. You were a mirror. You showed them their own limitations just by existing outside of them. And that was too much. Your growth triggered their stagnation. Your light exposed their shadows. You didn't have to speak. Your presence spoke volumes they didn't want to hear, so they started wishing you would fall. Not because you hurt them, but because your rising made their comfort zones feel small. They threw spiritual shade, fake concern, and quiet sabotage. They smiled to your face and hoped behind your back. They used phrases like stay humble when what they really meant was stay small. They disguised their envy in advice and pretended their judgment was wisdom. But what they didn't realize is When you try to curse someone who's protected, the energy doesn't vanish, it circles back. You didn't need to defend yourself, you didn't need to explain who you are. The same misunderstanding they used to attack you is now isolating them. The same energy they used to tear you down is now tearing through their peace. You didn't break, you adapted, you used the chaos as raw material and built from it. And now they're standing in the middle of everything they wished on you, confused, bitter, and wondering why their life feels like it's caving in. The truth? It's not bad luck. It's a reflection. They cursed what they couldn't comprehend, and life returned the message with interest. Number 3, they threw dirt on your name, not knowing you were seeded. They thought throwing dirt on your name would bury you. They thought if they spread enough lies, twisted the truth just right, and kept your name in their mouths long enough, people would stop seeing your value. They wanted your reputation ruined, your confidence shaken, your identity erased. It wasn't enough for them to walk away. They wanted others to walk away from you too. That was the goal. Isolation, humiliation, silence. What they didn't know is that dirt doesn't just bury, it plants. And while they were trying to suffocate your potential, you were taking root. In the dark, in the cold, in the silence where no one clapped or noticed, you were becoming. What they meant to destroy you only taught you how to grow without validation. You learned how to depend on depth instead of attention. You stopped explaining and started evolving. They were loud with their damage, but your healing was louder, not in volume but in impact. Because nothing confuses your enemies more than thriving after they swore you wouldn't. They didn't expect you to bloom. They thought the mud would stick. They thought the rumors would define you. They thought the narrative they created would be the final word. But you wrote a new chapter without needing their approval. Now the same people who tried to bury you are choking on their own bitterness. They're watching you rise in spaces they swore you'd never touch. And no matter what they say now, it no longer matters, because you've outgrown their reach. Your roots are too deep. You didn't just survive, you multiplied. And here's the part that stings for them. Your growth wasn't in spite of the dirt, it was because of it. Everything they tried to use against you became proof that you were never fragile, just underestimated. They threw dirt thinking it would cover you, but all they did was make the soil richer. Number 4, they feasted while you starved. Now the tables turned and their plates are empty. They watched you go without and felt no guilt. In fact, some of them enjoyed it. While you were scraping together pieces just to survive, emotionally, financially, spiritually, they were feasting on comfort, resources, and opportunities they never earned. They saw your struggle and looked the other way, not out of ignorance, but out of pride. They believed their position was permanent, that the tables couldn't turn, that your hunger made you less than. But what they failed to realize is that hunger sharpens you. While they were indulging, you were learning restraint. While they were coasting, you were building muscle in the dark. You became resourceful. You learned how to create with little, how to push through without applause, how to stretch faith when there was no fallback plan. Your lack wasn't your weakness. It was your preparation. They thought they won because they had more. They hoarded access, attention, opportunities, thinking that starving you would somehow protect their place. But now, the feast is over. The spotlight shifted. The ground moved. And what they once hoarded to feel powerful, it doesn't satisfy them anymore. It's tasteless. It's empty. Because excess without purpose turns into waste. Meanwhile, your discipline became your abundance. You don't just appreciate what's on your plate, you know how to multiply it. You know how to feed others without starving yourself. You're not just showing up, you're showing up with depth, with hunger still in your heart, but now with the strength to handle the weight. Now the same people who once overlooked you are scrambling to regain relevance. But it's too late. You ate humility, you drank patience, you swallowed pride, and that kind of diet makes you strong in ways that money, clout, or connections never will. The tables turned, and the difference is you know what to do with your seat. They only knew how to sit. Number 5, they prayed for your downfall, but God heard the echo and reversed the address. They didn't just hope you'd fail, they prayed for it. Quietly, behind fake smiles and forced support, they sent out energy coated in envy. They didn't say it out loud, not always, but the intent was there, thick in their tone, sharp in their silence, heavy in their absence when you needed them most. They didn't want to see you crash publicly, they just didn't want to see you rise at all. That was the real prayer. Let them disappear so I don't have to face what they remind me of. But what they forgot is that spiritual law doesn't operate on ego, it operates on truth. And truth has perfect aim. You can't send out poison and expect peace to greet you at the door. You can't speak curses over someone protected and think the ground won't answer back. So what happened? The same energy they whispered about you, plotted against you, and secretly celebrated in your low moments. It echoed, and that echo didn't vanish into thin air. It traveled. It gathered weight. And when it returned, it didn't knock politely. It exploded. They're now facing what they sent, not because you wished it on them, but because life has a built-in return policy. You get back what you broadcast, even if you try to disguise it as concern. The bitterness they aimed at you, it's soaked into their own lives. The trap they set for your downfall, they're the ones tripping now. Not out of karma in a fairy tale sense, but because you can't outrun the vibration you choose to live in. Meanwhile, you kept moving. You kept growing. You didn't even know half of what was being said behind your back, but it didn't matter. You were protected, not because you're perfect, but because your intentions were pure. That's the difference. They prayed for your ending, but God rerouted the address and handed them a mirror instead. Now the weight they meant for you is sitting in their own laps, and it's heavier than they ever imagined. Number 6. They saw you as a threat, not a mirror. They treated you like a problem from the moment you stopped shrinking. It wasn't because you were doing too much. It was because your existence reminded them they were doing too little. You never attacked them, never tried to outshine them. You just started walking in your truth, and that alone made them flinch. You didn't threaten their position. You threatened their illusion. Because the moment you stopped pretending, they had to start facing the parts of themselves they were hiding from. They didn't see you as a person, they saw you as a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. You reflected their untapped potential, their missed chances, their excuses. Every time you grew, it exposed the places they stayed stuck. Every time you chose healing, it highlighted how long they've been nursing wounds they refused to face. It wasn't jealousy in the traditional sense, it was conviction, deep soul-level discomfort dressed up as hate. So instead of asking how did they do it, they asked, who do they think they are? Because it was easier to make you the enemy than admit they were capable of more and just didn't act on it. It was easier to mock you than to confront their own fear of being seen. You were proof that change is possible, that survival doesn't have to look like suffering forever. And that made you dangerous, not because of what you had, but because of what you represented. They didn't need a villain. They needed someone to blame for the fact that they settled, so they chose you. But here's the thing, you weren't trying to compete. You were trying to be free. You weren't trying to take their spot. You were trying to find your voice. And the fact that your light made them uncomfortable doesn't mean you were too much. It means they were hiding in too little. You weren't the threat, you were the reminder, and they couldn't take it. Number 7, they weaponized your wounds, but you made them blueprints. They saw your wounds and thought they had the perfect weapon. Every scar, every mistake, every moment you struggled, they collected like ammunition to use against you. They whispered it like gossip, made it a headline in their stories, hoping to trap you in your past. Their goal was simple, expose your pain so you'd never move past it. They wanted the world to see you broken, fragile, and defined by your setbacks. They didn't realize that what they saw as your weakness was actually your blueprint for strength. You didn't ignore your wounds, you studied them. You learned where the cracks ran deep, where the pressure points were, and how to build support around them. Instead of hiding the pain, you faced it, analyzed it, and turned it into a roadmap for growth. Each scar became a lesson, each failure a stepping stone, and each heartbreak a reason to rebuild smarter and stronger. You weren't stuck in your story, you rewrote it with every step forward. Meanwhile, the people who weaponized your pain are still trapped in the same endless loops they tried to pin on you. They recycle old grudges, replay the same judgments, and refuse to evolve because they're clinging to what they think gives them power. But real power isn't about dragging others down, it's about rising above your history. You escaped those cycles by turning your wounds into blueprints, and now they're lost, trying to figure out how you moved on while they stayed stuck. They thought breaking you would keep you small, but all they did was give you a foundation to build on. You didn't just survive their attacks, you used them as a guide to becoming someone they can't understand, let alone control. Now the very wounds they tried to exploit are what make you unbreakable. Number 8, they thought delay was denial, you were just being distilled. They saw your waiting as weakness, as failure, like you'd given up or missed your chance. To them, delay meant denial. If you hadn't arrived on their timeline, it was proof you weren't worthy, capable, or ready. They whispered that you were stuck, lost, or afraid. But here's the truth they missed. Your waiting wasn't a setback, it was a distillation. It wasn't punishment, it was purification. While they rushed headfirst into opportunities, chasing quick wins and shallow applause, you were quietly refining yourself. You were shedding what didn't belong, learning what mattered, and building a foundation strong enough to hold the weight of real success. Your delay was a process of stripping away distractions, breaking down old versions of yourself, and focusing on what could last. They couldn't see that because their eyes were fixed on the race, the speed, the noise, the finish line that looks impressive but feels empty. They thought your slow burn meant you'd never light up. But real growth doesn't happen in a sprint. It's in the patient, sometimes painful, moments where no one's watching. And the only reward is becoming someone who can handle the fire ahead. Now the tables have turned. They're sitting in rooms where their rushed efforts mean little, surrounded by people who recognize the gaps in their foundation. Meanwhile, you enter spaces where your timing, patience, and depth make you stand out. Your worth isn't shouted, it's undeniable. They rushed to arrive, but you arrived ready. They confused delay with denial, but you understood it was distillation. And that difference, it's the quiet power that moves mountains while others are still trying to climb hills. Number 9, they tried to rewrite your story mid-sentence, but you hold the pen now. They believed they had the right to rewrite your story, especially when you were at your most vulnerable, mid-sentence, mid-struggle, mid-transformation. They acted like editors, cutting out your truth, changing the narrative to fit their version of you, making you smaller, weaker, less than what you really were. They added footnotes of doubt, footnotes of criticism, and chapters of gossip, hoping you'd lose control of your own story. They thought if they controlled the narrative, they controlled you. But what they didn't realize is that the pen was never theirs to take. You always held it, even when your hand felt weak, shaky, or unsure. You may have paused, but you never handed over control. They were only readers, stuck in the audience, watching and judging from the sidelines. They mistook being loud for having power, and they confused interference with influence. Now the plot twist is on them. The story you're writing no longer fits the version they tried to impose. Your chapters are filled with resilience, growth, and a clarity they can't rewrite or erase. You've reclaimed the narrative, turning the very pages they tried to smear into proof of your strength. Every twist and turn they feared has become your signature move. Irony chokes them because while they thought they were the authors, they've become captive readers, helpless as your story unfolds exactly as you intended, with no room left for their edits. Their attempts to distort your past now highlight their insecurity, their fear of your rise. You hold the pen now, and you're writing a story they never saw coming, one that leaves them speechless, powerless, and forced to watch as you become the author of your own destiny. Number 10, they thought power was in numbers, but you were the exception that made their equations collapse. They believed strength was a numbers game. The more people they gathered, the louder their voices, the safer they felt. They counted heads like soldiers in an army, convinced that the majority always wins, that if enough people agreed to write you off or tear you down, the truth would bend to their will. So they rallied, whispered, conspired, building walls made of many voices instead of solid facts. But they forgot one key thing: truth isn't democratic. It doesn't need votes or crowds to exist. Authenticity doesn't wait for approval. It stands alone, unwavering and unshaken. You were that lone variable in their neat, crowded equations, the one they didn't calculate for, the anomaly they couldn't fit into their patterns. Their numbers created noise, but you created clarity. While they were busy adding up distractions and distractions, you subtracted the unnecessary and simplified what mattered most: who you truly are. Their majority was a mask, a convenient camouflage for insecurity and fear. Your singular authenticity was the spotlight that exposed their facade, making their strength look fragile and their unity feel hollow. They thought they could drown you out with noise, but you turned that noise into silence, a silence so loud it shattered their assumptions. Their equations collapsed because they mistook quantity for quality, volume for value. You didn't need a crowd to validate your existence. Your truth carried its own weight. Now, while they scramble to maintain their fragile alliances, you stand apart, not just surviving but thriving. Proof that one person who refuses to conform can unravel the strongest illusions. You are the exception that disproved their rule, and that's the kind of power no number can match. Number 11. They celebrated the cocoon. Not knowing the wings were inevitable, they watched you quiet down and assumed you were defeated. To them, your silence was a surrender, proof that their attacks had worked, that you'd folded under pressure. They celebrated that quiet moment like a victory, convinced the story was over. But what they missed was the most important part. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. You weren't disappearing. You were transforming. While they were busy cheering your stillness, you were busy building wings. Every quiet day was a day spent gathering strength, learning and becoming something they couldn't recognize and couldn't stop. Their noise, their taunts, and their doubts became background static to the work you were doing within yourself. Now, your flight has taken off. You're moving in ways they never expected. Your rise is effortless, almost silent, but impossible to ignore. The noise they made to distract themselves is irrelevant because your wings carry you beyond their reach and beyond their influence. What looked like a pause was actually the calm before your storm, the stillness before your takeoff. Their celebration of your defeat only highlights their short-sightedness. They cheered for the cocoon, unaware that wings don't ask for permission to grow. And now, when you soar, their noise falls flat. It can't ground you or dim your light, because flight isn't about making noise, it's about movement, freedom, and leaving behind what tried to hold you down. Your silence was never surrender. It was strategy. And your wings? They're the loudest statement you'll ever make. Number 12. They wanted you broken so they'd feel whole. Now their cracks are loud. They wanted to see you broken because deep down it made them feel whole. Your pain was their proof that they were better, stronger, or simply safer. They built their fragile sense of worth on your failures, like a house of cards resting on your downfall. Every stumble you took was a brick in their ego's foundation. They didn't just wish you would fail, they needed it to feel like they mattered. But here's the brutal truth. When you rise, their whole structure trembles. Their self-worth wasn't built on strength, but on comparison. When you broke free from the limits they tried to impose, their ego scaffolding started to collapse. The cracks they hid so carefully behind arrogance, criticism, or silence began to widen and scream for attention. Now they're exposed. The very foundation they relied on, the shadow of your weakness, is gone. And without that, their sense of identity feels shaky, empty, and loud. Their insecurities, once buried beneath their pride, are suddenly impossible to ignore. The louder they try to pretend they're fine, the more obvious their cracks become. You didn't just survive their attempts to break you, you shattered their illusion of strength. Your rise wasn't just a personal victory, it was a seismic shift that revealed the fragility they tried to mask. They wanted you broken to feel whole, but what they got instead was a mirror reflecting their own fragility back at them. Now, while they scramble to patch up their cracks, you stand solid, built on your own strength, no longer a part of their shaky structure. And that's the harshest truth of all. Their wholeness was never real. It was only ever as strong as the pieces of you they tried to break. Number 13, they confused peace with passivity until you moved in power without permission. They watched your peace and thought it meant you were passive, weak, or resigned. To them, calm was a sign that you'd given up, that you had no fight left. They mistook your quiet confidence for surrender, assuming you'd play by their rules or stay in the background forever. But peace isn't about silence or stillness without purpose. Your calm was a choice, a strategy, and it carried more power than they ever imagined. While they rushed to react, argue, and prove themselves, you were preparing. Your patience wasn't waiting for permission, it was waiting for the right moment. You were gathering strength, sharpening focus, and building momentum in a way that no one saw coming. Your calm wasn't absence of action. It was the fuel behind your next move. When you finally acted, it wasn't with hesitation or apology. You moved with authority, precision, and undeniable force. Suddenly, the quiet person they overlooked became the storm they couldn't predict or control. Your power didn't ask for their approval or invite their consent. It arrived on your terms, unannounced and unstoppable. That's when they realized their mistake. Peace is not passivity. Calm is not weakness, and waiting is not giving up. You weren't waiting to be given power. You were claiming it silently, steadily, and fiercely. The storm had a name, you, and now they have to reckon with the force they underestimated because they mistook stillness for submission. They spoke your downfall like a prophecy, certain their words had the power to seal your fate. They cast doubts, whispered curses, and spun futures where you'd stumble, fail, and disappear. It wasn't just jealousy. It was fear dressed as certainty, a desperate attempt to control what they couldn't understand or contain. They wanted you trapped in a narrative they wrote for you, convinced their vision would become reality. But what they failed to see is that projections are mirrors, reflecting more about the caster than the target. The nightmare they wanted for you was actually a glimpse into their own fears and failures. They invested so much energy in imagining your collapse that they unknowingly invited their own downfall. What they cast outward was like a shadow, and shadows have a way of creeping back in when least expected. Now, instead of witnessing your demise, they find themselves living the very nightmare they designed. Their regrets and insecurities have taken shape, haunting the corners of their minds and the spaces they inhabit. The ghosts of their own making whisper louder than their intended curses, echoing reminders of what they lost: integrity, respect, peace. Meanwhile, you move forward, untouched by the shadows they cast. Your reality is proof that their projections were never more than illusions, fragile, distorted, and destined to rebound. Their attempts to define you only revealed their own limitations, and now they are trapped watching their own shadows dance on the walls, powerless to change the story you're writing with every step you take. The nightmare they dreamed for you became their own, and that is the ultimate irony. You broke free while they remained caught in a loop of their own making. Number 14. They prophesied your failure but woke up in their own nightmare. They were so sure of your failure that they spoke it like a prophecy, not once, not quietly, but with conviction. They convinced others, they convinced themselves. They thought their words had the weight to shape your future, to limit your path, to lock you into a version of yourself you'd already outgrown. But what they didn't realize is that every word they spoke over you was never really about you. It was about them. Their prophecy wasn't insight, it was projection. They weren't predicting your downfall, they were broadcasting their fears, their insecurities, their own suppressed potential. They couldn't face the ways they had settled or played small, so they turned your ambition into arrogance, your growth into threat, your silence into shame. They thought if they could speak your failure into the world, they could avoid confronting their own. But prophecy without truth is just noise, and truth doesn't answer to bitterness. You kept moving. You endured the mislabels, the doubt, the loneliness of being misunderstood. And you rose, not out of spite, but out of purpose. Now, the same people who called your fall are waking up in the wreckage of their own words. The nightmare they scripted for you has become the mirror they can't avoid. And it's reflecting their own missed chances, lost time, and internal chaos. They're stuck watching the shadows of what they tried to send your way. Only now, those shadows are dancing on the walls of their regret. Because while you've been building, healing, and rising, they've been circling the same fears, trapped by the energy they wasted on you. You didn't just survive their prophecy. You exposed it for what it was, a fear-drenched fantasy with no power over your reality. Now they're living in the echoes of their own words while you move forward, free. The story of being the chosen one in the face of relentless opposition is never just about survival. It's about transformation. Every whispered wish for your downfall, every attempt to clip your wings or rewrite your narrative was fuel for your rise, not your ruin. Those who celebrated your silence mistook it for surrender, but you were gathering strength in the quiet. Those who weaponized your wounds failed to see you were crafting a blueprint for victory. Their illusions of power, built on numbers, noise, or comparison, crumbled the moment you embraced your singular authenticity. What they thought were curses became echoes that only revealed their own cracks and fears. This journey is not about proving them wrong for the sake of revenge. It's about reclaiming your truth and living it boldly, unapologetically, and with unwavering purpose. You've learned that real power isn't loud or chaotic. It's steady, strategic, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. The delay they misread as denial was actually distillation, purifying your purpose and strengthening your resolve. Their attempts to define you mid-sentence only handed you the pen, empowering you to write a story they never imagined. Now, as you stand tall in your victory, their noise fades into irrelevance. The very energy they poured into wishing you low only made your foundation stronger. The irony is sharp. The nightmare they wished on you has circled back to them, a reflection of their own unresolved bitterness and fear. Meanwhile, you soar beyond the limitations they tried to impose, a living testament to the power of resilience, authenticity, and patience. This isn't just your story, it's a message to anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or attacked for simply being themselves. When the world wants to break you, remember, your scars are blueprints, your silence is strategy, and your rise is inevitable. You don't need their permission or their approval. The pen is in your hand, the pages are yours to fill, and the future belongs to those who refuse to be defined by anyone but themselves. Keep writing, keep rising. Your story is just beginning, and it's already extraordinary. If this message spoke to you, if you're ready to own your story and rise beyond what anyone expected, then don't just watch. Join the movement. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss the truth bombs and real talks coming your way. Like this video to show that strength grows in the face of challenge. Drop a comment below and share your own story, because your voice matters and can inspire others who need to hear it. And if you know someone who's fighting their own battles or breaking free from doubt, share this with them. Together, we're not just surviving, we're rewriting the rules. Let's keep rising, one story at a time. God bless you.